I've been a die-hard Halo fan for 22 years. I've been making videos about Halo for 14 years, which is well over half my life, and for the last 6 or so years, that has been my job. So I like to consider myself at least a decently knowledgeable dude when it comes to Halo. At least I did until last week. So when I was deep in the research trenches for my Cortana letters video, I discovered a piece of Halo lore that has existed since 2001 that I never knew about and that I have never once seen a single person talk about. Not a fan, not a 343 developer, not even a Bungie developer, and I guarantee you haven't either. When I found it, I legit felt like a Victorian child wearing a VR headset for the first time. I mean, to put it lightly, my perception of reality was shattered. But enough beating around the bush. This lore that has somehow evaded me for the last 2 decades is called the Transmissions. Now, the reason that these things have essentially become the lore equivalent of Solid Snake and have managed to evade me for so long is because they're some of the few things that were released before I even knew what Halo was. The Transmissions were something of a prelude to Halo 1 that take place right before the game begins, and they were released on an ancient version of Bungie.net in 2001. Now, trust me when I say this, I have searched high and low through all of the internet archives, through the Wayback Machine, and through tons of fan sites to try and find the original page that these transmissions were posted on, and despite fueling myself with cans of Lone Star, I still just couldn't do it. Unfortunately, I think the original Bungie.net page where these transmissions were posted has been lost to time. Thankfully though, sites like Halopedia have done God's work and backed them all up. So, what the hell are these transmissions? Well, not to point out the obvious, but as the name suggests, they're transmissions sent from various sources. Some are sent from Covenant ships in the Arbiter's Fleet of Particular Justice to the Pillar of Autumn, and vice versa. These transmissions take place in slipspace when the Arbiter was pursuing the Autumn as it fled from Reach. Others are sent from Covenant ships to a very early version of Reach, and because of the era that these were written in, some are even sent by a then rampant Cortana, who it seems had taken control of the Autumn. Now, I will warn you, as far as lore that I cover on this channel goes, this is probably some of the shallowest that I will ever cover, but regardless, these transmissions are a super interesting insight into a very early iteration of the Halo universe, and also there's a ton of really interesting surrounding details around them as well, so let's dive into them. The first transmission comes from the CPV Reverend, which is the first ever mention of the CPV class heavy destroyer that the Covenant used to glass Harvest, among likely many other worlds, and it's sent to the Pillar of Autumn. You slave, toil, bleed and sweat for your food, and we shall eat it. And then the second transmission was sent from the CPV Esteem, which is another heavy destroyer, again to the Autumn, and it reads, "You will not know where we have struck you until you have fallen." I promise you they get a lot more interesting than this. Transmissions 3 and 4 both come from a rather familiar source, the CCS Truth and Reconciliation, and are sent once again to the Pillar of Autumn. What you have begun in anger, you shall end in shame. None will exist to say whether you were defeated by valor or cruelty. Okay, theory time. I'm going to assume that these transmissions are being sent by their respective ship's shipmasters, which of course makes sense. And if so, that'd mean that these 2 transmissions, and spoilers, the other Truth and Reconciliation transmissions that we're going to cover later on, are being sent by Lat Ravami, who is the shipmaster of the Truth and Reconciliation, and also that gold elite that we kill on the bridge of the ship when we go to save keys. So next time you put that elite down, just make sure you give him 1 extra teabag for the trash talk that he gave to the Autumn only a few hours prior. Transmission number 5 comes from the CCS Sacred Promise, once again sent to the Autumn. Our conviction is like an arrow already in flight. Your life will only last until it reaches you. Okay, 2 things to talk about here. The first thing is that transmission might sound rather familiar, and, well, there's a reason for that. So these transmissions run kind of parallel to the Cortana letters, which I covered in my last video. I highly suggest that you go and watch that video once you've finished with this one, but I guess the too long don't watch is that basically those letters depict a very early version of Cortana where she's gone rampant, and in one of the letters, her transmission to the reader is cut off by this very transmission from the Sacred Promise. The second thing is that the Sacred Promise is a ship that actually popped up a few years later and has a rather interesting backstory. So it was the main protagonist, kind of, so to speak, in one of the stories in Conversations from the Universe, which is the booklet that came with the limited edition of Halo 2. In this story, the events of which were recovered from the Sacred Promise's black box, the ship is under attack by some miscellaneous UNSC ship, and is losing pretty heavily. It calls in support from the nearby Covenant cruiser, Devotion, to protect its dead zone, and the commitment and patience to dispatch extra fighter support, likely Seraphs. However, the UNSC ship continues to rain hell on them. Rather quickly, the commitment and patience is taken out entirely, and the Sacred Promise ultimately begins its mayday calls. Setting its sights on a nearby moon, the bridge crew prepare for a crash landing. The Devotion sadly never made it in time because within 10 seconds of bracing for atmospheric entry to the moon, the Sacred Promise was destroyed, and its black box was recovered by some unknown party. Which UNSC ship took out the Promise and the Commitment, which moon the Promise crashed on, and where in the galaxy this took place is sadly entirely unknown. These transmissions are shrouded in a lot of mystery still. If I had to guess, I'd say that maybe the Promise crash landed on Basis, which is the moon that orbits Threshold near Alpha Halo, but we can't say for sure. It's interesting though, because the Sacred Promise has only ever been featured in 2 stories, and those 2 stories are arguably 2 of Halo's most obscure. This story in Conversations from the Universe was really niche as well. I mean, it was written all the way back in 2004, 20 years ago now, and it's received a grand total of 0 expansion since. You know what? If this video happened to be an iceberg, I'd say that everything that we're covering today would be right at the bottom. But you know what shouldn't be right at the bottom, but rather right at the top? Well, your Paramount Plus subscription that should be right at the top of your list of things to stop paying for. I recently found out that somehow I was still being charged for it, but thankfully, today's sponsor, Rocket Money, stepped in to help. Rocket Money is the personal finance app that helps you cancel subscriptions, lower bills, and manage your money better. And thanks to them, my Paramount Plus subscription is no more. It has been cast into the depths of subscription hell right where it belongs. The app safely and securely identifies recurring charges and cancels unwanted subscriptions. And you can even cancel them directly in the app with only a few taps, which means no more annoying customer service calls or live chats. You can also use it to lower your bills as well. Just take a picture of your bill, upload it, and Rocket Money will negotiate the bill for you. Rocket Money has helped to save its customers up to $740 a year and has managed to cancel over $500 million worth of subscriptions. So to save more and spend less, join the over 5 million members using Rocket Money today by going to rocketmoney.com/HiddenXperia or just click the link in the description to get started for free. You can save even more as well by using their premium features. That's rocketmoney.com/HiddenXperia to get started for free. Anyways, back to the transmissions, we have transmission number 6, which is rather different. This one is sent from Cortana aboard the Pillar of Autumn to the Sacred Promise. He says, "I came not to send peace, but a sword." I guess you could say that Cortana could have been the one to take out the Sacred Promise as well. I mean, at the start of Halo 1, she talks about taking out 4 ships, and maybe one of those ships was the Sacred Promise. But regardless, what the hell is she talking about here? Well, this is one of the many biblical references in Halo. It's a reference to Matthew 10:34-36. "Do not think that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and a person's enemies will be those of his own household." So she's basically replying to the Covenant's attempts at psychological warfare with something a lot more raw. This is what psychological warfare looks like coming from an AI that's reached the metastability stage of rampancy. So she thinks that she's a god, but she's also kind of stable but insane at the same time. It's a bit of a weird one. Transmission number 7 is once again sent from the Truth and Reconciliation to the Autumn. "You have brought nothing to this world, and we will ensure you bring nothing out." Again, if you see my Cortana letters video, this is gonna sound familiar. This is yet another one of the Covenant transmissions that interrupts Cortana's megalomaniac messages to the reader. Okay, so transmission number 8 is a little bit different. It's sent from the CAR Contrition, which is a type of ship that's rarely seen on the front lines, to the SCS Hermes II, a human ship with a weird name, but we'll touch on that in a minute. "Through war we will teach your heresy. Through battle we will teach your frailty. Through death we will teach your fate." So, threatening message aside, this transmission is rather interesting. So firstly, the CAR class frigate has rarely been seen because typically they're used for cleanup operations or to survey and record glassed worlds. A number of them were also used by brutes during the Great Schism. Now, it has since had its name retconned to the UNSC Hermes, but SCS is a leftover term from a very, very early late 90s version of Halo's universe. As you'll know from the Cortana letters, the term Soul Core was the original name for the UNSC, and it remained kind of in canon limbo, funnily enough, only until recently with Halo Infinite, where for the first time in 20 years it was referenced again. There's a symbol on the bulldog for some reason that's some new Soul Core logo. Why? We have no idea. We don't even know what Soul Core really are still, but it's very cool to see such early remnants of Halo's universe being brought back to the forefront. Anyways, back to the Hermes 2 itself, this ship has never been mentioned again outside of these transmissions, so we know nothing else about it. Transmission number 9 comes from Cortana, again on the Pillar of Autumn, and is being sent to, well, an undetermined receiver. And it reads,
I have governed the unwilling.
I have walked the edge of the abyss.
These are megalomaniac exclamations of Cortana, who, again, at this point in Halo's timeline, was in the metastability stage of rampancy from Marathon. What these words mean, we have no idea, but honestly, I think they're just some very poetic threats. Transmission number 10 comes again from a CAR-class frigate, the Penance, and is sent to ESP-8 on Reach. You live without discipline and will die without honor. Now, obviously, this transmission was sent back on Reach, but what ESP-8 is, I legit have no idea. I did a lot of research, I tried to find out what it meant, and the closest thing I could find was that the MOD, which is basically the UK's version of the DoD, used the abbreviation of ESP for Electric Ship Program, but somehow I doubt that's what ESP-8 was meant to be on Reach. Realistically, it's probably some insignificant UNSC comms outpost or FOB or something like that, and the Penance is sending them one last little bit of trash talk before dropping 3 billion degree plasma on their heads. How kind. Transmission number 11 is sent by the CCS Purity of Spirit, once again to ESP-8. It is said remorse is the pain of sin. We feel no remorse. Now, I'm going to skip ahead one transmission here to transmission 13, which is again from the Purity of Spirit, but this time it's being sent to the Autumn, and it says, this world will be ruled in blood. So, the Purity of Spirit took part in the glassing of Reach with the rest of the Arbiter's fleet before following the Autumn to the Halo. However, the Arbiter and his boys got there first, and so, alongside the CCS Undiminished Entelechy, it was ordered to conduct a close-range survey of Installation 04 by the fleet's minor prophet of stewardship. The same prophet who sent the heretic leader to the gas mine where he'd ultimately defect and form his faction, and also the same prophet who was ultimately vaporized in the destruction of the Truth and Reconciliation. Anyways, going back one to transmission number 12, we have another rather interesting one. So this transmission was actually sent internally within the Pillar of Autumn, and it sounds to me like yet another megalomaniac Cortana message. These are the Tigers of Wrath. This is yet another example of Cortana quoting William Blake's The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, as she did in the Cortana letters. The full quote reads, "The Tigers of Wrath are wiser than the horses of instruction." And what this essentially boils down to is that it's William Blake's belief that the untamed primal energy of the tiger is superior to that of the horse that relies entirely on its human training and programming. This is of course meant to be a metaphor that can be applied to, just about anything in existence, but in this case, I like to interpret it as Cortana suggesting that the Covenant are the Tigers of Wrath. The UNSC are the Horse, the hyper-trained, strict military force, whereas the Covenant are driven solely by their zealous devotion to the Great Journey. And finally, we round out the transmissions with a 14th and final one from the Truth and Reconciliation, which was transmitted over all channels. When no human brick lies atop another, then we will be satisfied with your destruction. Nothing really much to say about that one. And so, those are the transmissions and every single morsel of lore that surrounds them that I could possibly talk about. Essentially, the Halo story that nobody knew existed. Like I said earlier on in the video, I like to think of most of my lore videos as like a 15-pound brisket, whereas this was more like a 200-gram ribeye, right? Still really nice, but just not quite as meaty. Regardless though, I really hope you enjoyed. I mean, this is hands down the most obscure lore that I've ever covered on the channel, and possibly ever will cover. That said, I'm actually planning a video next month on something that might be equally as obscure, maybe, not sure, look out for that bad boy, but up until I released that video, this is hands down the most obscure. Please, I'm really curious. If you've ever heard of these transmissions before, let me know down in the comments, because I sure as hell hadn't. But yeah, with that said, let's round out today's delicious, rather juicy, but at the same time, sample menu-sized lore video. I want to give a huge thank you to all of my amazing patrons for the continued support over there, as per usual. Thank you all so much, and thank you all so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this video as light in the lore as it was. I tried. I really tried, so I hope you guys enjoy it. And I'll catch you all in the next one.